Good day, everyone. A pleasant day to our respected professor, Dr. Ariel Cabillas. I am Amethyst Antemayubay, and today I have the privilege of presenting my topic titled Decision Making in Educational Policy, Policy Formulation, and Policy Implementation. Educational policies shape the direction of schools, influence teaching, and determine how resources are allocated and establish standards that guides educational institutions. However, effective policies do not happen by chance. They are the result of careful decision making that involves research, collaboration, planning, implementation, and continuous evaluation. Today, I will discuss two important components of educational policy decision making, which are policy formulation and policy implementation. Decision making is one of the most significant responsibilities of educational leaders. Every policy adopted by a school, division, or national education system begins with a decision intended to address a particular educational need or problem. Educational policy refers to a set of principles, guidelines, rules, and actions developed by educational authorities to improve the quality, accessibility, equity, and effectiveness of education. These policies may address curriculum, student welfare, teacher development, assessment, school governance, funding, or educational reforms. The success of any educational policy largely depends on two critical stages. First is policy implementation, where decisions are carefully designed and planned. Second is policy implementation, where these decisions are transformed into actual practices within the schools and educational institutions. Let us first understand the process of policy formulation. Policy formulation is the process of developing educational policies that address identified educational issues and goals. It involves analyzing problems, exploring possible solutions, consulting stakeholders, and selecting the most appropriate policy option. This stage serves as the foundation of every successful educational reform because poor planning often leads to the unsuccessful implementation. There are several important steps involved in policy formulation. First, problem identification. Every policy begins by identifying an educational issue that requires attention. Educational leaders collect data through school performance reports, research findings, classroom observations, surveys, community consultations, and national educational assessment. For example, if schools experience declining reading comprehension among students, educational leaders recognize literacy improvement as a priority requiring policy intervention. Without accurately identifying the problem, policies may fail to address the actual needs of learners and schools. Second is gathering evidence and research. Decision makers rely on evidence based practices rather than assumptions. Research findings, educational statistics, international best practices, and previous policy outcomes provide valuable information in designing effective policies. Evidence based decision making minimizes personal bias and increases the likelihood that policies will achieve their intended objectives. The third is stakeholder consultation. Educational policy should never be developed by one individual alone. Effective policy formulation requires consultation with various stakeholders, including teachers, school administrators, students, parents, community leaders, school governing boards, government agencies, and even educational experts. Stakeholders' participation ensures that multiple perspectives are considered and promotes transparency, inclusiveness, and shared ownership of the policy. When stakeholders actively participate in decision making, they are more likely to support the policy during the implementation. Fourth, developing policy alternatives. After gathering sufficient information, policymakers generate different possible solutions. Each alternative is evaluated according to the several criteria such as effectiveness, cost, feasibility, equity, sustainability, and legal considerations. Decision makers compare these alternatives and select the option that best address the identified educational concerns while maximizing available resources. Fifth is policy approval and adoption. The proposed policy undergoes review by the authorized educational bodies before receiving formal approval. Depending on the level of governance, approval may come from school boards, divisions, educational institutions, or government agencies. Once approved, the policy becomes an official guide for educational practice. Several factors influence decision making during policy formulation. These include political priorities, economic conditions, resources, educational research, technological developments, social and cultural values, legal requirements, and national educational goals. Educational leaders must carefully balance these factors to develop realistic, equitable, and sustainable policies. While policy formulation focuses on the deciding what should be done, the next stage determines how these decisions become reality. A well designed policy has little value unless it is properly implemented. This brings us to the second major component of educational policy decision making, which is policy implementation. Now, policy implementation refers to the process of translating approved educational policies into actual programs or practices and daily operations within educational institutions. This stage transforms written policies into meaningful educational experiences for teachers and learners. Even the most carefully designed policy can fail if implementation is weak or poorly managed. Successful implementation involves several important activities. First is the strategic planning. Educational leaders develop implementations plans that specify objectives, classroom observations, student achievement data, teacher feedback, school reports, performance indicators. And, evaluation determines whether the policy is producing the intended outcomes. If challenges arise, leaders revise strategies or recommended policy improvements. Thus, implementation is continuous cycle of action, monitoring, reflection, and even improvement. Despite careful planning, educational institutions often encounter implementation challenges. This may include limited financial resources, resistance to change, lack of stakeholder support, inadequate teacher training, poor communication, weak leadership, insufficient monitoring, or even changing political priorities. Educational leaders must anticipate these challenges and adopt collaboration problem solving approaches to ensure successful policy implementation. The educational leaders play a vital role throughout both policy implementation and policy formulation. They are expected to make evidence based decisions, engage stakeholders in meaningful participation, allocate resources wisely, communicate policies effectively, monitor implementation continuously, evaluate outcomes objectively, and even promote accountability and continuous improvement. Transformational educational leaders recognize that successful policy implementation depends not only on rules and procedures, but also in inspiring commitment, collaboration, and even shared responsibilities. In conclusion, effective decision making is the foundation of successful educational policy. Policy formation enables educators or the educational leaders to identify problems, gather evidence, consult stakeholders, evaluate alternatives, and design appropriate educational solutions. While policy implementation transforms this successfully developed policy into meaningful actions that improve teaching, learning, and school management. Ultimately, educational policies achieve their purpose only when thoughtful planning is combined with effective implementation, strong leadership, stakeholder collaboration, adequate resources, and continuous evaluation. As future educational leaders and Doctor of Education professionals someday, we are called not merely to create policies, but to make informed, ethical, evidence based decisions that positively influence educational institutions and improve learning opportunities for every student. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Good day, everyone.